That's the problem. We cannot, as an international city, we cannot, as the financial capital of this country and of the world, not have a functioning judicial system.
If I gave you the power to solve this crisis, what would you do?
First thing I would do is stop litigation, stop having press conferences, and I would make sure that the courts were open and fully functioning and fully staffed.
Arthur, same question. I gave you the power. What would you do?
I think Conrad's answer is perfectly fine.
Bert?
I would mandate that the governor join those negotiations that are up there. They have an agenda. Part of that agenda was provided by our organization. There are many items on that agenda, any one of which could open up these courts and hire back those people who are unfortunately fired, those court officers, those clerks, those stenographers that are absolutely a necessary ingredient, and call a special session of the legislature, present a proposal to them by their leadership, and pass it and open up these courts. We cannot continue this any longer.
Conrad, from your point of view, what is going to happen if there are further cuts in next year's budget?
It's unimaginable that can happen. It seems to me that the courts have demonstrated that there is simply a crisis of enormous proportions. We cannot have people not able to bring criminal cases to trial. We cannot have custody proceedings not available. We cannot have our civil litigants unable to get days in court. I refuse to speculate on the proposition there will be less money available. It's simply an intolerable idea.
Last week, sitting in that very chair, Chief Judge Wackler said the next cut is from the criminal court. How do you feel about that?
I trust that Chief Judge Wackler and all of us will never see such a day.
Arthur, what do you think is going to happen?
I don't think there are going to be further cuts, but the reality of the situation is that we're not facing a localized kind of problem. We're seeing short funding of the courts across the country. We're seeing that because people are getting tired of funding a judicial system which is really quite expensive. We're very concerned about individual rights. We have a heavy burden of dealing with the criminal law, particularly at a time when we have a lot of drug-related crime. This kind of problem is being dealt with across the country. It comes up again and again. We need to cope with it. Let's just take the analogy. Let's assume that the governor announced that we were calling off the elections in 50% of the assembly districts in the state, because there just wasn't money around to do it. Now, that would strike us all as silly. But that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a basic government function, and we're calling it off. We're saying, gee, we can't cope with this. Now, you have civil justice because you don't want people to go out into the street and solve the problems themselves. They're likely to do it with guns or clubs or fists.
It's a wonderful analogy.
If we're going to deal with this, we must go forward. We must solve this. And the governor has to come forward and deal with this in a sensible way. He has rather a staggering budget to deal with. He has a great deal of money in it. We're not talking about allocating between